Hello everyone, welcome to this quick video presentation on Iris Options window, which describes settings of the iris. This video is part of the Tata Memorial Center Unit for Strengthening Cause of Death Data in collaboration with CDC Foundation. My name is Mrs. Swati Sangle. I am working as the IT consultant with the CDC Foundation supporting data for health initiative activities in India. I support IRIS implementation efforts in Mumbai, supported through the Unit for Strengthening Cause of Death Data based at the Tata Memorial Center, Mumbai. In this video, you will learn all about the settings of IRIS data entry interface, database connections, user settings, option buttons, etc. Let's start with IRIS options window. Through the options, you can set a wide variety of default values and parameters according to your own requirements. To open the option window, go to the Tools menu and select the Options item. You will then see the Options window opens. Option window contains 6 tabs and 6 buttons, which is explained in detail in this video. Here you will see the General tab in the Options window. It presents the settings of the iris mode menu, behavior, separators, appearance, and lock path. In the next slides, we will learn about each section in detail. This slide describes each option in Mode menu section within the General tab. By selecting Data Entry Interface Mode, all fields are open for editing and coding. If you want to set code only as default, to enter ICD-10 WHO codes in the ICD-10 WHO codes fields but not text in the diagnosis text fields, then select the code only as default option. When Record after next reject is selected, IRIS records the new record automatically and gives you immediate access to the explanations. If you want to use the fifth line in part 1, select the fifth line in part 1 option, then IRIS displays the fifth line as line E, which can be used if the physician states more than 3 due to relationships on the certificate. IRIS display additional information on maternal death and perinatal deaths by selecting maternal death and perinatal death options. When display error messages in pop-up box option is selected, this setting determines how coding error messages are displayed. When display text line in to-do list is selected, if one of the IRIS diagnostic text fields cannot fully code the text line, an error message will appear. When Standardization 1 Always option is selected, IRIS will always apply the filters in the Standardization 1 table to any text strings that you search for in the dictionary. To enter individual and medical data but not for coding, you select the Data Entry No Coding option. IRIS will show the time interval field for part 2 at the medical part by selecting interval field for part 2. Here, let me present the various options in the behavior section within the General tab. Disable logging option. If you do not have Disable logging option selected, IRIS stores a complete log of the batch processing, including processing statistics and a complete description of how the terms in Part 1 and Part 2 were modified in the language standardization step in the folder specified in the log path field. When you select Disable logging, IRIS stores the processing statistics but not the language standardization. An Explain window will not contain any data under the IRIS tab. When you select Enable Fixed Comments, you can use the Iris translation file to specify fixed comments or messages that can be sent back to the parent application. By selecting maximum length of medical terms, you can set the number of characters in the medical text field between 50 and 500. The default maximum length of medical term is 500 characters. By selecting maximum length of comments, you can set the number of characters in the comments field between 3 and 2000. The default maximum length of comments is 2000 characters. If you select the option Set 9 automatically, Iris automatically sets both the place of occurrence code and the activity code to 9. If it is not selected, these two fields are left empty. In either case, the coder can change the place of occurrence and activity codes. Note that the place of occurrence and activity fields are not available for editing if the manner of death is set to deceased. If you select offsetting dates in export, the date of birth will be 1st of January of the given year. The date of death will be evaluated according to that. Otherwise, original dates will be exported. The certificate key export works only if offsetting dates in export is not selected. Here, let me present two options in the Separators section within General tab. If several conditions have been reported on the same line, you must separate the text into single diagnostic expressions. Otherwise, Iris will not be able to match the expressions to the dictionary. You can separate the expressions either manually or through regular expressions in the standardization procedure. Further, you must use a standard separator that Iris recognizes. There are two types of separators, one for simple enumeration of conditions and one for indicating a causal relationship. For simple enumeration, select the For Diagnostics option. The comma is the default separator. For example, hypertension and gout should be hypertension, gout after standardization with a comma as a separator. Due to separator, if there is stated causal relationship between the conditions, then condition should be separated by the due to causal separator. The default causal separator is vertical bar. For example, hypertension due to diabetes should be hypertension vertical bar diabetes after standardization and with vertical bar as separator. Here, let me present the two options in the Appearance section within General tab. If you select the multiple cause code in line bold, Iris displays the codes in the multiple cause codes field below the underline cause fields in bold typeface. If you select medical text uppercase, Iris shows medical terms in text fields of Part 1 and Part 2 uppercase. The log part defines the place where Iris will store log files for the batch processing. You can change the path via the button Browse. Next to the General tab, you will find the Checks tab that includes various options for checks such as reject handling, final checks for interactive coding, and batch processing. In the next slides, we will learn about each section in detail. This slide describes each option in reject handling section within the Checks tab. The main injury codes defined in Chapter 19. The main injury required setting specifies whether the coder is supposed to supply a code for main injury in cases where the underlying cause is in Chapter 20. Chapter 20 is based on external causes and poisoning. If this option is selected, IRIS prompts the coder to assign a main injury code. If the box is not selected, there is no such prompt. If several diseases are reported on the same line and there is only one time expression in the time interval column, IRIS cannot decide whether the stated interval refers to one, several, or all of the reported conditions. If the reject for interval reasons box is selected, the record will be rejected and the coder will have to decide to which of the conditions the time interval refers. If box is not selected, the time interval will be ignored. The comparing manner of death, underlying cause, settings checks underlying cause and manner of death correspondence and reject the certificate if they don't fit together. For example, in case of suicide, the underlying cause should fall between ICD-10 code X60 and X849 or should equal Y870. The comparing manner of death, multiple causes, setting checks, reported multiple causes and manner of death correspondence and reject the certificate if they don't fit together. For example, in case of suicide, all Chapter 20 codes reported on the certificate should fall between ICD-10 code X60 and X849 or should equal Y870. This section, Final Checks for Interactive Coding, lists the different criteria that will be applied to check a record after interactive coding. If one of these criteria is met, IRIS will issue a message asking the code whether he wants to modify the coding or not. This section, Final Checks for Batch Processing, lists the different criteria that will be applied to check a record after batch coding. If one of these criteria is met, IRIS will reject the record. Next to the Checks tab, you will find the User tab with various user settings. Use section symbol as delimiter intervals. In the User Settings section, the first line allows to the character section as a time interval delimiter into diagnosis text. The IRIS Institute provides two different tables for the time intervals and time intervals underscore ref. Time intervals underscore ref is using the round bracket as delimiter and the time interval table is using the paragraph sign, section sign as delimiter for the time interval. So it depends on what do you would like to use as delimiter. The round bracket is set as default. Interval standardization on medical fields. Medical text in diagnosis text field could contain interval expressions. In most of the cases, that's the reality. Therefore, IRIS supports the historically. Accordingly, the standardization process applies time interval standardization as part of the standardization order on the medical text by default. This application could be neglected on medical text. Medical and interval text concatenation. Time interval field stands for interval text only, but as discussed previously, medical text could also hold interval information. Therefore, IRIS concatenates diagnosis field content and interval field content for sure when interval field standardization is achieved by default. The system can ask to use interval field context only by switching off these checkboxes. Hard deletion in dictionary. Hard deletion in dictionary tool allows deleting physically the records from the underlying database. Switching off this option is also called as soft deletion. Dictionary tool will achieve logical deletion where the records are not deleted physically but deactivated. User path. Language file. You can use the language file to state the location of a file with translation of all iris labels. Certificate images. If you have scanned images of your certificates and want to make them accessible through the open image, then specify the path to the folder where the death certificate pictures are located in the certificate images field in the user paths section. Logging Muse explanation. When we do the batch processing, that time log file generates with information of standardization process. But if you want to add the coding explanations of Muse of the certificates in batch mode in log file, then tick the box Logging Muse explanations. After running the batch, the coding steps and their explanations as they appear in Muse can be analyzed. It also shows in figure. Since Iris version 5.6.0, the certificate key is provided at the batch log file. The certificate database tabs contains settings that define the type of database management system used for the Iris certificates database. In the kind of connections section, Iris offers connections to OLEDB databases, Oracle, MS SQL, PostgreSQL, or MySQL Server. For the default OLEDB manager, the provider depends on which database management system you use. The default in the provider field is for the Access Database Manager. For other database systems, look for the appropriate provider string on the website www.connectionstrings.com. The data source is the path where Iris will find the Iris certificates database. You can use the Browse button to find the location. For MySQL or SQL Server, you must state the name of both the server and database's name in the MySQL or SQL Server field. You may need to supply user identification and password to access the database in your specific implementation. The Table Databases tab contains settings that define the type of database management system used for the Iris Tables database. It works in the same way as the Certificate Database tab. The Coding tab contains various settings related to coding itself. In the Table Settings section, you have Coding Year. This value determines which entries in the tables are valid. For instance, if an entry in the dictionary table has the start year field set to 2015 and an end year set to 2020 and the current coding year is set to 2021, this dictionary entry will not be available for coding. It works in the same way for other tables. Current dictionary, you can select your dictionary if you use different dictionaries. Start and end year. Here you can define the default values of the start and end years when creating entries in the dictionary and the standardization tables. In the maintenance field, you can change the password for the developer's interface to the dictionary, standardization tables, and data entry interface. The default password is pwd iris. It is recommended that you change this password if you do not want others to change the table content. In the Muse setting section, you will find the translation button and version button. If you click on translation, you could translate the Muse explanation window with all messages. You could change the Muse specification if you click the button version. Here, buttons of the windows are used to manage sets of options. The Save Options button saves all modifications in one go. If you change a setting in options, the new setting remains active during the current Iris session. If you want to use this new setting as your default for future sessions, then click the Save Options button to store the new settings. The Save Options as button permits to store and save all the present options in a text file where you want to. The Open Options From button allows you to reload options from a text file. This feature is very convenient for users that have to work on different sets of lots. For instance, a coder that works on two different years of death. In this case, the certificate options, the tables, and the coding options are different. To facilitate the swapping between each year, save the options of each year of death during Save Options As and open the set of options with the Open Options From when necessary. If you have made a temporary changes to the options, you can go back to your own default settings by clicking Reload User Options. If you want to go back to the settings Iris had when you first installed it, then click Reset to Standard button. OK button used to quit the option window. Some options will not take effect until next time you start Iris. If so, Iris will display a message asking if you want to save the new options and restart Iris. Thank you for listening to this information video presenting the various components within the Iris option window. The information presented in the video comes mainly from the Iris website that is available on the link presented on the slide. Please consider looking at the website for further information on Iris, how it is maintained, the countries implementing Iris, and engaged in the core group and any other questions you may have. I hope you found this short introduction video on Iris helpful and hope you consider watching the other Iris and informational videos we have developed and posted on the YouTube channel for the Unit for Strengthening Cause of Death Data. Thank you.